The upcoming 2024 U.S. presidential election holds significant implications not only for Americans, but for the world, particularly in regions like the Indo-Pacific, where power dynamics are delicate. At the forefront are two prominent candidates, each representing different visions of America's role in the world. On one side, Vice President Kamala Harris, now endorsed by President Biden, seeks to continue the democratic approach, one that emphasizes alliances, diplomacy, and a coalition-based international order. On the other, former President Donald Trump, representing the Republican Party, brings with him a more direct, transactional approach, rooted in the philosophy of America First. But how will either candidate's vision impact allies like the Philippines, which sits at a strategic crossroads in the Indo-Pacific? As we look to the election, it's worth examining the different foreign policy strategies each candidate represents, the potential shifts in economic and security policies, and, perhaps most importantly, how a change in the White House could reshape the Philippines' role in an increasingly competitive region. The Philippines and the U.S. have a defense relationship dating back decades, anchored by treaties like the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty and the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA. These agreements allow the U.S. military to operate within Philippine bases, bolstering regional security in the face of rising tensions, particularly with China in the South China Sea. The Biden administration has leaned into these commitments, strengthening the alliance through joint exercises, security aid, and diplomatic efforts to counterbalance China's influence. In recent years, the U.S. has even expanded access to military sites in the Philippines, an indication of the growing strategic importance the U.S. places on its Indo-Pacific alliances. A Democratic administration under Kamala Harris would likely continue this alliance-building approach, fostering multilateral support structures, including partnerships with nations like Japan, Australia, and South Korea, all of which share common security concerns. Harris would likely emphasize the importance of coalition forces in deterring aggression, especially in hotspots like the South China Sea. However, Harris might also place a high value on human rights and democratic values, which could introduce complexity to the U.S. Philippines relationship if disagreements over these issues resurface. On the other hand, if Donald Trump returns to the White House, the approach may shift. Trump's policies in his previous term were marked by a focus on burden sharing, pressing allies to increase their defense spending and contribute more directly to mutual defense efforts. A Trump administration might place a higher emphasis on the Philippines shouldering more financial responsibility for joint defense initiatives, a move that could strain Manila's resources. However, Trump's stance on China's activities in the South China Sea has historically been assertive, which might mean more direct U.S. support for Philippine security, though with expectations for increased Philippine involvement. Beyond security, the economic implications of the U.S. election for the Philippines are substantial. The Philippines has strong economic ties with the U.S., particularly through its business process outsourcing, BPO, industry and trade in sectors like electronics and textiles. Under Biden, the Philippines has benefited from policies encouraging trade frameworks that strengthen economic resilience across the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPF, introduced by Biden, seeks to create a coalition of Indo-Pacific economies to counterbalance China's economic influence. If Harris were to continue Biden's legacy, this would likely mean further integration with U.S.-led regional economic frameworks. In contrast, Trump's economic policy approach is more nationalist. If Trump resumes office, he may prioritize U.S. job creation and manufacturing, potentially impacting outsourcing jobs in the Philippines. During Trump's previous term, outsourcing growth slowed as U.S.-based companies were encouraged to bring jobs back home. A renewed push for American jobs could impact BPO revenue, a significant contributor to the Philippine economy. And while Trump would likely support trade with the Philippines, his preference for bilateral agreements might alter the Philippines' economic landscape, as the nation may have to adapt to shifting U.S. trade priorities. The U.S. election outcome also has implications for immigration and the Filipino diaspora. The U.S. hosts a large Filipino population, and remittances from Filipino workers abroad are vital to the Philippine economy. Trump's past policies emphasized immigration control, which included limits on work visas and increased scrutiny on visa applications. For Filipino families, these restrictions had financial consequences, as remittances from the U.S. account for a significant portion of the Philippine GDP. A similar immigration policy under Trump could reduce opportunities for Filipino workers abroad and potentially lower remittance inflows. In contrast, Harris would likely continue Biden's stance on immigration, which has been relatively open, creating a more stable environment for Filipino workers in the U.S. Given the economic contributions of overseas Filipino workers, particularly in sectors like healthcare, a stable immigration policy could mean steady remittances, benefiting the broader Philippine economy. In a region as strategically crucial as Southeast Asia, diplomatic relations are paramount. Both candidates recognize the importance of the Indo-Pacific, but their approaches could differ in tone and execution. The Biden administration has been diplomatic, striving to build strong alliances and rally Indo-Pacific nations to counterbalance China's growing influence. Harris would likely reinforce this approach, positioning the U.S. as a reliable ally that values multilateral cooperation. This could mean continued support for the Philippines in navigating complex relationships with neighboring countries and potential partnerships to uphold international maritime laws in the South China Sea. Trump, however, has historically been less supportive of multilateral coalitions, instead focusing on individual deals with specific nations. While Trump's stance on China remains assertive, his focus may shift from collective regional defense to individual, transactional partnerships. This approach could influence how Southeast Asian countries, including the Philippines, interact with each other and with the U.S., potentially complicating regional solidarity. In the end, the U.S. election isn't just about who wins the White House. It's about the broader shifts in global power dynamics. The Philippines sits in a strategic location, and its relationship with the U.S. is one of its most important assets in balancing security and economic growth. Whether Trump or Harris assumes office, the Philippines will need to adapt to the resulting changes in U.S. foreign policy, balancing its economic and security interests with its long-standing diplomatic ties. Will it be a continued push for strengthened alliances and multilateral trade under Harris? Or a more transactional, America-centered approach under Trump, with heightened expectations for allies to contribute more? As the election approaches, these questions grow more relevant for the Philippines and the broader Indo-Pacific region. In either scenario, the U.S. Philippines alliance will likely remain robust, but could face new demands, expectations, and challenges. For now, it's a waiting game, but the outcome of this election could shape not only America's future, but the Philippines' place in a rapidly changing world. Thank you for tuning in. If you found this valuable, please show your appreciation by giving a thumbs up and subscribing to OHA News Asia, your trusted source for knowledge always at your fingertips.